Hey, what's up, guys? It's me. We're back. We're here for another chapter, hopefully two, but we'll see what happens, of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. That's right. The title, the thumbnail, they both match and they're accurate to the video. That never happens. Anyways, getting right back into it, not quite into it. We weren't here last time. We talked about marriage, in particular, Christian marriage, but also just marriage in general, from the ideas that we have about it. So the ideas of, say, being in true love conquers all, to the idea of, oh, if you just find the right person, you'll never get divorced and you'll just stay happy and in love the whole entire time. To a lot of ideas, to the point where he says, and I would agree this to a certain extent, it's just better to not get married if you're not going to take those vows, this religious idea of marriage serious in the first place. Because you're better off just not taking that risk or just making those vows to then contradict them or more or less turn it into a lie or just, what it is now, which is just a handshake deal, so to speak. It covers a lot of things. I think it's, like I said, I think it's more critical, interesting, relevant now in our current day of age of the year of our Lord 2026, as opposed to, say, 20 years ago when it was written, preferably. Or at the very least, the time of this writer, like his youth and age, whatever that would be. I don't know. I don't know when he was born or when this was written. But it was really fun. I highly recommend you go back and watch that video. Really good. I think it's good on a multitude of ways, but especially because I read it very, very well, I think. Anyways, let's get back into the book. Chapter 7, Forgiveness. I said in a previous chapter that chastity was the most unpopular of the Christian virtues, but I'm not sure I was right. I believe there is one more even unpopular. It is laid down in the Christian rule, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, because in Christian morals, thy neighbor includes thy enemy. And so we come up against this terrible duty of forgiving our enemies. Everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea, until they have something to forgive, as we had during the war. And then, to mention the subject at all, is to be greeted with howls of anger. It is not that people think this is too high and difficult a virtue, it is that they think it is hateful and contemptible. That sort of talk makes them sick, they say, and half you already went to ask me, I wonder how you'd feel about forgiving the Gestapo if you were a Pole or a Jew. Skipping that song? So do I. I wonder very much. Just as when Christianity tells me that I must not deny my religion, even to save myself from death by torture, I wonder very much what I should do when it comes to the point. I'm not trying to tell you in this book what I could do. I can do precious little. I'm telling you what Christianity is. I did not invent it, and there, right in the middle of it, I find forgive us our sins if we forgive those that sin against us. Therefore, or there, is no slightest suggestion that we are offered forgiveness on any other terms. It is made perfectly clear that if we do not forgive, we shall not be forgiven. Here we go, period. There are two more ways about it. What are we to do? It's going to be hard enough anyway, but I think there are two things we can do to make it easier. When you start mathematics, you do not begin with the calculus. You begin with simple addition. In the same way, if we really want, but all depends on really wanting, to learn how to forgive, perhaps we had better start with something easier than the Gestapo. One might start with forgiving one's husband or wife, or parents or children, or the nearest NCO. I don't know what that means. What's an NCO? Someone tell me in the comments. For something they have done or said in the last week. They'll probably keep us busy for the moment, and secondly, we might try to understand exactly what loving your neighbor as yourself means. I have to love him as I love myself. Well, how exactly do I love myself? Now that I come to think of it, I have not exactly got a feeling of fondness or affection for myself, and I do not even always enjoy my own society. So apparently, love your neighbor does not mean feel fond of him or find him attractive. I ought to have seen that before, because of course, you cannot feel fond of a person by trying. Do I think well of myself, think myself a nice chap? Well, I'm afraid I sometimes do, and those who are, no doubt, my worst moments. But that is why I love myself. In fact, it is the other way around. My self-love makes me think of myself nice, but thinking myself nice is not why I love myself. So loving my enemies does not apparently mean thinking them nice either. That is an enormous relief, for a good many people imagine that forgiving your enemies means making out that they are really not such bad fellows after all, when it is quite plain that they are. Go a step further. In my most clear-sighted moments, not only do I not think of myself as a nice man, but I know that I am a very nasty one. I can look at some of the things I have done with horror and loathing. So apparently, I am not allowed to loathe and hate some of the things my enemies do. Now that I come to think of it, I remember Christian teachers telling me long ago that I must hate a bad man's actions, but not hate the bad man. Or as they would say, hate the sin, not the sinner. Classic. There we go. Period. You know what I'm saying? For a long time, I used to think that this a silly, straw-splitting distinction. How could you hate what a man did and not hate the man? But years later, it occurred to me that there was one man whom I had been doing this all my life, namely, myself. Wow, that's deep. However, much I might dislike my own cowardice or conceit or greed, I went on loving myself. There had never been the slightest difficulty about it. In fact, the very reason why I hated the things was that I loved the man. Just because I loved myself, I was sorry to find that I was the sort of man who did those things. Consequently, Christianity does not want us to reduce by one atom the hatred we feel for cruelty and treachery. We ought to hate them, but not one word of what we have said about them needs to be unsaid, but it does want us to have them in the same way in which we hate things in ourselves, being sorry that the man should have done such things and hoping, if it is any way possible, that somehow, sometime, somewhere, he can be cured and made human again. The real test is this. Suppose one reads a story of filthy atrocities in the paper, then suppose that something turns up suggesting that the story might not be quite true, or not quite so bad as it was made out. Is one's first feeling, thank God, even though they aren't quite as bad as that? Or is it a feeling of disappointment and even a determination to cling to the first story for the sheer pleasure of thinking your enemies as bad as possible? If it is the second, then it is, I'm afraid, the first step in a process which, if following to the end, will make us evolve into devils. You see, one is beginning to wish that black... What? You see, one is beginning to wish that black was a little blacker. This is a weird sentence. If we forgive that wish its head, later on we shall wish to see gray as black, and then to see white itself as black. Okay, I think I get his point here. Finally, we shall insist on seeing everything, God and our friends and ourselves included, as bad, and not be able to stop doing it. We shall be fixed forever in a universe of pure hatred. Now a step further, does loving your enemy mean not punishing him? No, for loving myself does not mean that I ought to not subject myself to punishment, even to death. If you had committed a murder, the right Christian thing to do would be to give yourself up to the police and be hanged. It is therefore, in my opinion, perfectly right for a Christian judge to sentence a man to death or a Christian soldier to kill an enemy. I've always thought so ever since I became a Christian and long before the war, and I still think so now, that we are at peace. It is no good quoting, thou shalt not kill. There are two Greek words, the ordinary word, to kill, and the word to murder. And when Christ quotes that commandment, he uses the murder one in all three accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I am told there is the same distinction in Hebrew. All killing is not murder, any more than all sexual intercourse is adultery. All these, these semantical word definitional distinctions are very much so important, in particular with this idea not only of hate the sin but not the sinner, but also these ideas of words have meaning. And so killing isn't always wrong, but murder is, even though murder is a type of killing, the killing isn't always wrong necessarily. I think we can all kind of conceptualize and get that. But this type of very specific word choice is important and crucial, I find, in a lot of ways to not only like Christian doctrine and stuff like that, but just normal theology and worldviews and beliefs. Because what's the saying that what you think influences what you say, and what you say influences how you think, or something to that effect, vice versa? It's very interesting. Anyways, right back along. All killing is not murder, any more than all sexual intercourse is adultery. When soldiers come to St. John the Baptist asking what to do, he never remotely suggests that they ought to have the army, nor did Christ when he met a Roman sergeant major, what they called a centurion. The idea of the knight, the Christian in arms, for the defense of a good cause, is one of great Christian ideas. War is a dreadful thing, and I can respect an honest pacifist, though I think he is entirely mistaken. What I cannot understand is this sort of semi-pacifism you get nowadays, which gives people the idea that though you have to fight, you ought to do it with a long face and as if you were ashamed of it. It is that feeling that robs lots of magnificent young Christians in the services of something they have a right to, something which is the natural accompaniment of courage, a kind of gaiety, and wholeheartedness. I've often thought to myself how it would have been if when I served in the First World War, dang, he's old. When I served in the First World War, I and some young German had killed each other simultaneously and found ourselves together a moment after death. I cannot imagine that either of us would have felt any resentment or even any embarrassment. I think we might have laughed over it. I imagine somebody will say, well, if one is allowed to condemn the enemy's acts and punish him and kill him, what difference is left between Christian morality and the ordinary view? All the difference in the world. That's what the difference is. Remember, we Christians think man lives forever. Therefore, what really matters is those little marks or twists on the central inside part of the soul, which are going to turn it, in the long run, into a heavenly or hellish creature. We may kill if necessary, but we must not hate and enjoy hating. We may punish if necessary, but we must not enjoy it. In other words, something inside us, the feeling of resentment, the feeling that wants to get one's own back, must be simply killed. I do not mean that anyone can decide this moment that he will never feel it anymore. That is not how things happen. I mean that every time it bobs its head up, day after day, year after year, all our lives long, we must hit it on the head. It is hard work, but the attempt is not impossible. Even while we kill and punish, we must try to feel about the enemy as we feel about ourselves, to wish that he were not bad, to hope that he may, in this world or another, be cured. In fact, to wish his good. That is what is meant in the Bible by loving him, wishing his good, and not feeling fond of him, nor saying he is nice when he is not. I admit that this means loving people who have nothing lovable about them, but then, has oneself anything lovable about it? You love it simply because it is yourself. God intends us to love all selves in the same way and for the same reason. He has given us the sum already worked out in our own case to show us how it works. We have then to go on and apply the rule to all other selves. Perhaps it makes it easier if we remember that that is how he loves us. Not for any nice, attractive qualities we think we have, but just because we are the things called selves. For really, there is nothing else in us to love. Creatures like us who actually find hatred such a pleasure that to give it up is like giving up beer or tobacco. Dang, that's really a strong way to end it. That's actually a good way to end it as well, I find. But that's be neither here nor there. I've only been reading for 10 minutes. I guess I'll actually just end it there just to see how well this episode does. But just to make it a little bit longer and to talk about what we just read. I think in particular this last line is really good. And I think this chapter is extremely, say, basic and straightforward in its message and understanding, which I think is good and just good. I'm not going to condemn it for being simple or basic. I also think that if we can understand it, that's all the better. What he's talking about here, which I think is interesting in that last line, is about forgiveness and how he mentions the love for ourselves. So kind of how he starts it and ends it in a lot of sense. We're told to love our neighbor like we love ourselves. And, you know, to a lot of people that seems very simple or straightforward of like, oh yeah, of course, I'll treat them, with a lot of respect, a lot of care in the world, all these things. But that also means kind of in the same way you feel about yourself in regards to understanding your true self and how you really feel about yourself. In as much as when you mess up, when you do something wrong or do something, you may then also wish for someone else to be as forgiving, understanding with you in the vice versa. It's very much so like living and being in their shoes. And I think he says it somewhere here near the end about in the war, if he was in war with someone and just hoping that if not in this life, maybe in the next one, that you be forgiven and understanding and cured of whatever problem it is they were going through, whatever vice they were facing. As well, I think also an important point is at the end there is him saying that we're not to enjoy it. I think it's actually really important. Well, because I think a lot of times we can slip into that, which he even says. It is like many other virtues that we're supposed to have, that of forgiveness. And I would agree that something like forgiving, while you may think is very simple and straightforward for a lot of people to understand, I think it might actually be what he says, the hardest one for us to actually achieve and uphold and keep going daily. Even though we think it's the easiest one of just like forgive and forget. It's actually a lot harder than we think. But not taking pleasure in it, I think, is actually extremely important and crucial. And I find it's really interesting to me specifically, because in a lot of things, even when we're right about something, about say, not punishing someone, but like say calling someone out for their bad actions, they are normally things that should be called out for the most part. And even if we don't do it wrong, like say we're in the right the whole way, we call them out, or it's just a simple disagreement, and we did it very respectfully and fine, and we were proven right or wrong. I think it's extremely important, like he says, to not take great pleasure in it, because then it does become another one of the great deadly sins, like one of the 7 deadly sins, right? It's like a gluttony, right? If we like always being right and vindicated and proven, like yeah, see, I'm always right, I'm the stuff, then it just really is like hunger or like sex or whatever that may be. Addiction would be the better word, where it's just you're always trying to get that hit and take of it. But I think it's really good. But I think it's also most prevalent nowadays in regards to violence and fighting, both physically and just literally in terms of arguments. But that's it for today, guys. That was a really short chapter. I didn't mean it to be this short. I think maybe doing one at a time, being a little slower, so I can kind of grasp it a little better, and also the reading becomes a bit more smoother and chill for everyone to enjoy, which I like. We'll also see how well this episode goes over. Maybe 10 minutes is a lot better than 20 minutes for y'all. That's it. God bless you guys. See you next week, next time for another reading. Peace.